ring is mine.
About 2 months ago, the Greymoor expansion arrived to ESO, and with it, the Antiquities skylines. To the PvP community, that meant one thing: Mythic pieces are finally here. Mythic pieces are uniquely designed one-piece sets, most of which contain an insanely powerful effect with a penalty or a drawback attached. And while many of those pieces were perceived as powerful, one had seemed to stand out from the rest just a little bit.
The Malacath Band of Brutality.
Malacath Band of Brutality.
Malacath's Band of Brutality.
Malacath's Band of Brutality increases your damage done by 25%. You cannot deal critical damage. In this short video, I'm going to go over why this simple 2 lines set has broken multiple build design concepts that ESO has had for years, and how it completely took over the entire PvP meta. Here are the subjects we're going to talk about: the intended strength of the set, in my opinion; the 3 design flaws of Malacath Band of Brutality; Malacath in the upcoming DLC Stonethorn; and my personal suggestions for fixes that could keep the set relevant, but take it a little bit away from taking over the entire meta completely. Just like other Mythic pieces, Malacath's Band is meant to give a unique and powerful effect, which 25% extra damage done certainly is, but at a price. The price for Malacath's benefit is the fact you can no longer crit. Being unable to crit has its drawbacks for sure, considering as crit attacks deal 50% additional damage by default, crit modifiers and mitigations aside. Having multiple crits going off in one burst is usually a key aspect in getting a kill on another player. While your burst might be strong on its own, having multiple crits within the same combo of a burst is always going to be relevant in pushing your opponent's HP as far down as possible, meaning the inability to critically strike significantly reduces the kill potential of your burst. However, getting a guaranteed 25% damage increase on all your abilities makes up for that penalty and goes beyond it. While critical abilities contribute to the kill potential of your burst, they are never guaranteed, even if your critical chance stat is very high. However, Malacath's bonus is a guaranteed modifier that goes on top of your buffed stats after being affected by passives, CPs, and more, meaning your consistent damage and consistent pressure are both much stronger, and that is always guaranteed. With the ups and downs of using Malacath in mind, let's go on and discuss the 3 design flaws of the set. The first one being the fact Mala completely counters the critical resistance stat. Crit resistance has historically always been one of the most important defensive stats in ESO PvP, and still is to this day. That is, since, as I mentioned earlier in this video, hitting the enemy with multiple consecutive critical strikes is one of the best ways to secure a kill on them, which means if you want to be able to survive incoming bursts of damage from an enemy player, you want to be able to mitigate their incoming critical strikes as best you can. The best way to do that, assuming you're not using a niche build that can constantly dodge or permablock, is to put a lot of resources into critical resistance. Those resources are commonly seen in the usage of the impenetrable trait, utilizing CP into the crit resist star, and more recently utilizing the newly added crit resist baseline that was given to all players in ESO last patch. However, Malacath users can completely bypass this form of mitigation, since using Malacath increases your burst's damage not through crits as it prevents those, but through your normal strikes. The crit resistance stat loses all relevancy when fighting a Malacath user. And since this stat is still so important to maintain to counter everyone who doesn't use Malacath, when you build a well-balanced setup with a decent critical resistance, you are practically wasting some of your resources in build making in any encounter versus a Malacath user. This situation completely breaks the crit power versus crit resistance build design that ESO has had for many years. Another build design flaw the set has, in my opinion, is the fact Mala is what I like to call a heavy armor enabler. Heavy Armor Enabler is a set that allows its user to benefit from the defensive aspects of heavy armor type without suffering much offensive penalty. Let me explain this concept before we discuss Malacath in this context. One of the biggest differences between light and medium armor types to the heavy type is that the first two encourage offensive playstyle by providing you with increased damage, sustain, and perhaps most importantly, they benefit your crits. Heavy armor, on the other hand, benefits its user with higher resistances, which mitigate damage, and better healing power, at the cost of not benefiting their offense, and in that, their crits. Heavy enabler sets allow their users to gain the defensive benefits of heavy armor, usually by allowing their users to maintain high offensive potential while using heavy armor. A great example for a set like that is the Warrior's Fury set, which is one of the strongest offensive sets in the game and has been for a very long time despite it being a heavy armor set. Malacath enables heavy armor because it prevents the need of critical strikes and increases your damage done overall, which makes using heavy armor not penalize you when it doesn't benefit your crits like the other armor types, since you don't need crits anyways. In that, Malacath enables its users to be able to use heavy armor effectively, which means they are tankier and more survivable while still able to have a very strong offense. And the history of PvP in ESO has taught us that heavy armor metas are some of the most stale and unenjoyable ones ever. The last design flaw of Malacath that I'd like to mention is the fact it affects proc sets and empowers them. ESO has had many absolutely awful patches where proc sets took over the whole meta and destroyed all fun in PvP. From the OG pre-nerfed Scoria and Selines that had no visual cue and hit multiple times, through the rough months of Viper's Sting that had multiple nerfs which still did not resolve the issue, and even recently with the Slode's Apocalypse that made PvP unplayable until it was nerfed to all hell, proc sets have always been a plague upon ESO's PvP that allowed the underskilled masses to overwhelm outnumbered players and skilled players to take on anyone that tried to enjoy a non-proc build. One of the biggest and most meaningful changes ZOS have ever made to proc sets to limit their power level has been the 2.7.5 nerf, which made proc sets unable to crit. This change has kept most proc sets outside of the meta, with very few exceptions throughout the years. However, as previously mentioned, Malacath's no-crit method has some very powerful consequences. While proc sets still cannot crit today, they are buffed in damage value by Malacath, meaning all proc sets a Malacath user has equipped will be buffed by 25% damage, just like all the skills of the user. This effect makes proc sets more than just viable again, it makes them some of the most powerful sets to use if you already use Malacath on your build or even if not. In fact, it seems for the vast majority of classes in ESO right now, some of the most meta builds are using Malacath with a bunch of proc sets, even on classes where losing your crit damage is a huge loss like Templars or Nightblades. Looking forward, with the coming of the Stonethorn patch in a few weeks, now that the PTS patch notes are finally out, it seems as if Malacath is only going to grow more and more powerful. While other mythics like Thrashan are addressed in the PTS since they affect the PvE meta a lot, Malacath is not being nerfed or changed in the patch notes. However, many sets that it affects are. I won't be naming specific sets in this video since I don't want to promote the use of future proc sets that are being buffed right now. However, even through a quick glance at the massive list of sets that are being changed and buffed in the coming patch, you could easily spot a whole lot of proc sets that are becoming much stronger, even ones that are very popular in the meta right now. And all the chance-based procs becoming a lot more reliable for the sake of server performance at the expense of a balanced PvP experience. My expectation for the next patch is that using heavy armor setups with 2 to 3 proc sets, and of course Malacath, will become the new meta for most classes. I'd expect this to be a full-on plague in most types of PvP, especially in no-CP where procs are a lot more powerful as it is right now. So, if you don't currently own Malacath on your account, I would very much recommend you start working towards getting ones, since it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Before I end this video, I'd like to mention a few ideas for possible fixes that I'd like for ZOS to consider. The first idea is the simplest. Make proc sets unaffected by Malacath. Since I believe empowering proc sets is the biggest issue that the set currently has, I think removing its effect on those sets while keeping its overall concept similar to what it is now would resolve a huge part of the problem. Another idea that I think could work well, although a bit more complex, is to make Malacath not prevent your crits, but lower their damage. Something like, for example, increase your non-critical strikes damage by 25%, but reduce your critical strikes damage by 50%. This would make Malacath more difficult to use, as while you have it equipped, your critical damage will become very, very low, especially since enemies can still mitigate it. But your non-critical damage would remain very powerful. This would encourage the user of the set to reduce their critical chance as much as possible to try and benefit a lot from Malacath without too much penalty. The last idea that I'll bring up would be to simply reduce the overall damage increase that Malacath grants, to take it down to somewhere between 15 and 20%, down from its current 25. This would allow Malacath to still be very powerful, especially with heavy armor and proc sets builds, however, not encourage simply every player in the game to use it, as its bonus won't be worth giving up some classes' passives that are based around critical modifiers for. And that's about all I have to say about Malacath. Thank you guys so much for watching this video all the way through. I truly appreciate that. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit that like button. And if you'd like to watch more from me in the future, feel free to smash that subscribe button as well. If you like this sort of ranting and discussing the history and build concepts of ESO, feel free to drop a follow on my Twitch page. Link will be down in the description, as I tend to discuss pretty much anything ESO related live on my streams, and I'd love to discuss whatever you'd like to bring up and debate over it. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.